Hello, I am Chris Gazdick with Through a Therapist's Eyes, a mental health and substance abuse therapist. This is where we invite you to rediscover emotions and become your best self through a book. See, I did it. I switched it up, Kasie.
I love it.
Right. We welcome you to Through a Therapist's Eyes, where you get personal insights directly from a therapist in your own home or personal time in your car. So see the world through the lens of a therapist. In this case, two therapists. Right, Kasie?
Yeah, what an interesting concept, but glad to be here.
And now I lost my little run. I do different things and I lose my...
This is where you introduce me as the co-host.
She's making fun of me, y'all, on the way I say co-host. I evidently am from the north, and I sound weird when I say co-host.
It's only that word, though. It's interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
I've never had anybody really say that to me. But anyway, being aware this is not the delivery of therapy services in any way, contact at throughatherapisteyes.com gives us a great way to get back with you, to get information to you individually with thoughts, questions, just feedback on the show. We've been increasingly getting some of that. That's been really fun. We've incorporated it into our show. So leave us 5-star reviews, words of praise or frustrations. Heavy on the praise and light on the frustrations, but seriously, reviews on Apple Podcast helps us get noticed and helps us grow the show and all of that stuff. We are endeavoring to figure this thing out together, the human emotional experience, right?
That is exactly right. And when you come up with those answers, bottle it and sell it.
So we are doing a little bit different thing this month. If you've been following along, we've had a few months now where we got a guest co-host.
That was beautiful.
Was that better?
Yeah.
That was better? Okay.
I loved it. Say it again.
Co-host. You'll catch me later in the show. So, and Adam was hanging out with us, and then we had, who else do we have? Matthew. Matthew was hanging out with us, and this is different, though. I think we had last week, Kasie was with us, and so she's actually a mental health and substance abuse therapist as well. No huge, long introduction for you, because you're a co-host. Co-host?
I loved it.
But she's actually doing the show notes. You're, like, in charge here. This is kind of cool for me.
Of course I'm
right?
in charge.
Well, right.
Girl power.
Girl power. Well, okay. Are we going to go to a generational thing?
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, this is really kind of neat for me because I do make appearances on other podcasts. As a matter of fact, The Conquest of Bliss is a podcast that I was on recently, and so that was a really...
I love that title.
Oh, it was an awesome title. And I tell you, I told her I was impressed with something else because I was on the show, and they had like piano music going on in the background, and it was stupid cool. I was like, this is pretty neat.
Yeah.
It was a very relaxing kind of thing. So, Neil, we might need to get piano playing in the background as we get silent and quiet for a moment and have a nice... No. I'm going to turn the cameras around at you, man. Yeah, it was neat, man. So The Conquest of Bliss, I don't know when it's coming out. We seriously haven't heard, have we? We haven't gotten back from them. But check them out. It's a cool show. And, I was on it. And I think we had a really cool conversation really about not general therapy themes and all. I thought it was a really good conversation, sort of different than we kind of have here. She had a lot of really cool questions that was kind of probing into my thoughts about things, and I almost want to listen again because it was that fun to do.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was fun.
I definitely want to check it out, so let us know. And
Conquest of Bliss.
It's ready to roll.
What are we talking about, ma'am?
Yeah, so first and foremost, thanks for having me on and letting me do a little bit of content for the show today. I think that's a really cool difference for me. And to be completely fair, this is the first content I've ever prepared for a podcast.
Yeah, but you've done presentations. And you've done talks
but but the format's different. To be honest, it's a little different because it's trying to have a natural conversation about planned information, which is interesting.
I know.
Yeah.
It is different.
So
I appreciate that.
One thing I can promise you that's going to happen is I am going to keep it real. So,
okay. I know this. I know this.
I will be true to my authentic self. So if I get lost, I'm going to say I'm lost. And if not, we'll just go along for the ride. So it'll be fun.
Generational stereotypes. Yeah. Are we entitled or enlightened? And I tell you, you were telling me what we were going to talk about, and I was kind of excited about it because honestly, like, to me, I've always there's several topics that I will talk about and deal with but I recognize, like I always say, I don't feel like I'm a cultural expert. You know, I'm sensitive of the issues, aware of the issues. I've got trainings on the issues, but I don't feel I'm strong on it personally, honestly. And I love it when we have guests on, or you're picking the topic, talking about something that I'm really interested in, because I don't. This is just like that. I don't feel like I'm an expert on generational things, but I'm fascinated with it, and I incorporate it into my work too, because it really impacts the human emotional experience in our relationships.
Yeah, I mean it's vital across so many aspects of life. And so I'm very excited to bring this topic forward to tonight's discussion because I am obsessed with multi-generational everything.
Oh, wow. Really?
Workplace, communities, places of leisure, churches. I love and are fascinated by these concepts. So tonight, what I want to do...
I
go
got to
ahead.
tell you before we go
Yeah,
any
go ahead.
further, I'm a little bit nervous. Neil, Craig is going to laugh his little bottom off. That was the PG version. Because I am probably going to be caught cold beyond the shadow of a doubt, I would imagine, as the show goes along. And I like to do that to Craig. So you have to tell him. You have to tell him and all others that have been on the show, like, turnabout's fair play, and I'm terrified. I got to,
Yeah. So be
a little
prepared.
over-exaggerated.
Just be prepared. It's happening. You're going to be caught cold.
It's
So
happening.
to be completely fair, Chris is coming into this experience as, as fresh as possible, I guess you would say. So, and also we are going to be discussing, I want to make this disclaimer, things about like stereotypes and things of that nature. So please know that these are not the expressed opinions of ourselves. This is more so us just talking through some of this information. So it might be things that we've heard, things that we've experienced, things like that. It's not just us saying like, this is what this is and like a hard and fast rule.
Yeah, and I'll tell you as well for me, Kasie, because people do talk about this. That's why I think people are going to tune into this in the sense that there's a lot of things going on in our country right now. There's a lot going on in our country and the way our country plays to the world. And people love talking about this in a critical way, in a mean way almost, I think. And I want you to know that I'm kind of thinking about this and going to be talking about it through a clinical lens, which is very different than typically the way people will discuss it, I think. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so my biggest hope is that you can take something away from this discussion today and this topic and maybe have some perspective shift or at least some enlightenment about the other side of the coin if there are certain things that you think about different generations.
Okay.
Fair?
Absolutely. Let's roll.
All right, let's roll with it. So the first thing I want to do is kind of an integrative experience. So when you're listening to the podcast at home, feel free to kind of play around with this because what I want to do first are some word associations. So the way this kind of works is I'm going to throw out...
Get your mic, Neil.
I'm going to throw out the name of a generation, okay? And to be fair, we didn't include the traditionalist in this segment of the show just because...
The traditionalist?
That's prior to 1946. If you were born prior to 1946.
Is that like the earliest name of a cohort? Like, well, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, the traditionalists.
The traditionalists.
Born prior to 1946.
Well, what about the greatest generation? Stuff like that. That's
Millennials, exactly. We're going to talk about that later. Oh, sorry. What was the... What?
That's awesome. Nicely done. You threw me. I was like, wait a minute.
You're like, I'm sorry, what?
Seriously, the traditionalists are called the World War kind of cohort and whatnot?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I never heard that term.
Yeah. And so, and to be fair, this does come from Purdue Global. So I did include this source in the show notes so you can get that sourcing because there are some differences in years and stuff like that. But we did not include the traditionalists in this segment just because the data and research is about the working population. And so over the age of 75 are typically not working. And so that's why I didn't make a lot of correlations with that population of person. So anyway, our first little segment here is to do word association. I'm going to say the name of a generation. I want you to think of one word that automatically comes to your brain when I say the name of the generation. Be your most authentic self. Ready?
Okay, and play it along at home. I'll be silent maybe for a couple seconds.
Yeah, play along at home. I think
and
this is a really good integrative experience. Okay,
Okay.
ready? Boomer.
Boomer. Old. Right?
Okay.
You going, Neil? Can Neil play?
Thoughts? Yeah. Boomer.
I thought old.
Yeah.
Okay. Millennial.
Yeah, that's not fair. Irresponsible, but that's not true.
Okay. But that's the first
Right,
word
that's
that
what-
comes
that's
to your
what's
brain.
there.
I appreciate your authenticity.
That's what's there.
Millennial.
I don't want to answer my first thought since I'm in that age group, but I'll go Snowflake.
Oh, that's a good
Ooh.
one. That's the good one that gets thrown out there.
Okay.
Gen X. That'd be you.
Dang, rebel. But that's not true either.
Rebel.
Rebel.
Interesting.
Rebel. Yeah.
Okay. Gen X.
I got nothing on that one. I'm trying to think. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's a weird one for me because that'd be like my parents, and so I'm trying to think what they're like, and there's a
I am
difference.
not your parent.
You're in the same generation.
You're in the same
as us.
generation of our parents.
You're pretty close.
This is
there.
called Hard Facts with Casey.
Wow.
Check your birth certificate.
I've got to be turning a color on the camera.
For sure. So Gen Xers, like you said, rebel. I would say stuck in their ways
Interesting.
as my first thought, my initial thought.
See, because and I guess well, I should just continue to. Are there more?
Yep, there's one more. So the last generation that we're going to talk about today is Gen Z, and that is the current generation that we're in, Gen Z.
Oh God, that's my kids. Frustrating.
Okay. Gen Z, Neil.
That's probably not fair. Go ahead.
I'd probably just techie.
Yeah,
that's what I think.
Techie, like I think like
it's
social media,
absolutely
like
something
social media,
computer
yeah.
tech related. Call them little
Future
posters and-
leaders of the free world,
Right,
if
that's
that's
always
scary
scary.
at all for anyone. All right, so to kind of break this down,
But jokes aside with that,
yeah,
I'm sure we'll talk about it. But one of the precept beliefs that I see clinically in my mind is that people look at the generations under them, and I kind of believe that basically all generations and cohort names have had that said about them.
yeah,
Really, all of them. Not that's why I said rebel with Gen X. Like, to me, that's what I lived, and it was the 80s and things are trying to be all sex, drugs, and rock and roll and all this kind of thing. But I know we were criticized as being latchkey kids and this type of thing. So it's like the older generations crashing the new ones. I think that's is that a rule? You know?
yeah. And I think that's what we're going to get to today is kind of talking through that and how the next perception of the next generation, what that looks like and how we get there. So I think that you have a great generation, though. I will arguably say here on record,
Oh wow.
the best music came from your generation. I just want to point that out. Like for me anyway, I believe the best music came
Totally
out
agree.
of the 70s
Totally
into the
agree.
early 80s. So, but to kind of define what Purdue Global talked about as far as the years that qualify each of these generations, boomers, for our intent and purposes today, will be anyone that was born between 1946 and 1964. Gen Xers are 1965 to 1980. Millennials, like myself, are 1981 to 2000, and then Gen Z is 2000 to present. I did see something that said 2000 to 2015, but we're a little beyond that, and so the generation has continued at this point because they haven't come up with a new name for
Is this
the
where we
new
can
generation.
talk about confronting you with your cohort confusion?
Yeah, go ahead. You can confront that if you want to.
Yeah, because we were talking about that, Neil. You remember last week we were talking about this, I think, when she had the idea. I mean, I think, were integral in, helping her to understand, she's confused, right?
I do think that the classification, the years, I think are off. I think that my wife and I, because she's the same age as Kasie and me, we don't see us as millennials because I feel like for us, we're close enough in the Gen X side. We're in that weird transition that we had enough experience from the Gen X side, but yet we weren't really young enough for the technology side. And I think, to me, my wife and I talked about that. It feels like if you're in high school or middle school when social media started, MySpace, Facebook.
Yeah.
That to me is the millennial age, but that's just my personal experience. So that means that's going towards more mid to late 80s as a millennial, not 81. That's just my take being in that age group.
Right. And I understand that. But do you think that that opinion comes from the bad rap and stereotypes that millennials have received? So like, oh, I'm not a millennial. Like,
I
you
see
see
where
what
you're
I'm
going
saying
with
there?
that.
So it's like, you know, even though I'm qualified as a millennial by the year, do I back away from calling myself a millennial because of all of the negatively connotated things that have come out about millennials or Gen Zers?
But you know, here's a question I have for you. If you've read a lot about this or known, like, who decides? Is this a cultural, like, societal agreement in time, or is there like some sort of decider?
Yeah, so there's kind of like these defining moments, right?
Yeah,
so it's momentary history. Yeah.
History and moments.
Yeah, so I think whenever there's a shift, so because the millennia occurred during the Gen Y, kind of after the Gen Xers, into the dawn of the internet, they took basically like 10 years before that, thinking that people born in 1981 as of 1991 would have started having like home computers and things like that.
But who's the they? That's my question.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would assume just, what is it, genealogists and things like that study, or sociologists too, team of professionals. The World Health Organization has some input into this as well, as far as like,
oh boy, the who's involved.
Like, but I mean, like geriatrics and things like that, to be able to say like, even the way the human body's formed, there's a whole list of research science behind that.
Okay.
In terms of...
So there is a little formality to...
Yeah, there is. There's formalities to it. And I think it also, you know, as people evolve and adapt, I think looking at, have we gotten smarter, things like that, as things have continued, like the size of the brain, all of that stuff is kind of calculated into that. Like, are humans evolving even from...
So it's
like
a little bit of a scientist... Homo sapien classification?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize
in a sense. Yeah, in a sense that also have these definite markers of history. You
Okay.
know? Like,
so that they are scientists who write about, think about, and problem solve for generational issues, which probably influences government funding, literally.
Yeah.
Different demographics, different socioeconomic considerations. It's just all that.
Yeah.
So there is some formality to this stuff.
And I also think it's almost culture in a way, right? Like the way we relate to each other and the way that we progress within our own generation becomes kind of a cultural norm. Some of our mannerisms and behaviors, things like that, get lumped together into these groupings that say people experience life in a like seemingly similar way because of the things that are available to them. So kind of to piggyback on what Neil had said too. Yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I was just thinking about it. You know, I work kind of scientists.
Yeah.
And I do think about, you know, when people are having generational, you know, like intergenerational homes and things like that, that impacts relationships, that impacts emotions, it impacts, you know, the experiences people have in different kind of attachments that occur and stuff. That, and again, that's the clinical lens I'm thinking about this through.
Absolutely. And the way I became fascinated by this was from working in the school system and seeing that at the downturn of the economic crises, like throughout the 2000s and the home market crashes and things like that, I was finding that a lot of students that I was working with were being raised by generations ahead, by grandparents, maternal, paternal, family members, things like that, or having to go into the foster care system and being raised by strangers who were generations removed from where they were and helping them relate.
Yeah. And I see clinical applications of that in my therapy office.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I became insanely interesting. But where this really slapped me in the face, to be completely honest, was I was sent to a leadership training. Okay. And in the leadership training, we ran around, we talked about our credentials, so on and so forth. We did the Myers-Briggs personality test. Like, we all had our little placards with our ENFJs and ENFPs and all that stuff
I'm
on our
gonna do
placards.
a show on that stuff, man. Do you like that stuff?
It's you know, things, you know, like story for a different show. Maybe have me on that show. We'll see how see the fireworks
that might be a good that might be a good one for us, clinical brains.
For sure. Yeah. So, but anyway, I'm sitting in this large group of people. They don't know me from Adam. I don't really know them from Adam. We just worked as part of a larger organization. So when we had to do problem-solving activities together, we did it. And then the buzz started around the room about how unreliable millennials are.
Right.
So
Wow.
then it started
in a
in
management
on
conference.
yeah. So then it
Yeah.
started in on their personal children. Then it radiated to their departments at work. Then it radiated to what they see in the community.
And they're just going with it.
And all the while they're going off of it because the stereotypes that were happening was that there's no way that I could have been part of that generation because here I am as a manager, things like this with a lot of aptitude and things like that. Till finally I raised my hand and said,
because you're the youngest lady in the room
Yeah,
and a
I'm
hard
like-
as the hard charger that you are and the
yeah,
accomplished person that young and led. So this is a very, I just want to get an idea that
Yeah.
this is a very different atmosphere.
yeah.
Older people, and then there's really you, kind of, right? Is that
Right.
fair?
Yeah, myself and maybe two other people
Yeah.
that were part of my generation. I was like, just so we're clear, I'm technically a millennial.
Yeah.
Like, and they were like, no, you're not. And they went into all the reasons why I couldn't
Wow.
be a millennial. And I was
Right.
like, there are so many stereotypes around these generational things because all the while I'm sitting there thinking about how judgmental Gen Xers are, to be honest.
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
for the audience purpose, you got to understand, like this is a CEU training. I suspect, right?
Yeah, it
This
was a CEU training.
So
yeah.
you got to understand the kind of the culture of what we have to do. You know, we all, to keep our license and stuff, we have to go to this. You know, it's a nice I guess I'm making fun of it a little bit just to make the point of the culture of the room. You know, it's all academic, and we're all kind of thinking about things. We're all, you know, being sensitive to other people's views and other people's culture, and you know, it's a little politically correctish. Is that a fair way to put
Yeah.
it? Right. And then there's you saying,
Yeah. And-
like, bam, mic drop kind of moment is what that is.
Right, because
Yeah.
the truth is at this point of where we were in society, we were talking about cultural competence, and the leader of this training did a fantastic job to say generations are cultural as well, and obviously this room is not completely competent in that. And you want to talk about a
That's what
silent
she said?
room? Yeah. You want to talk about a silent room? Because the truth is we'll get to talking about later, the theory behind this is that no matter what your generation is, there can be some transcending among generations, and there has to be because we live together, work together, play together as we see in our everyday lives. Yeah. And so that's where some of this came from for me. It kind of came to a screeching halt in my brain, and I really wanted to kind of focus some content here.
Well, and you know, and honestly, to me, the clinical application of that is they're really like, why do people do this? There's a lot of shame. I mean, that's why I am a bona fide full blown Gen Xer.
Yeah.
Right. No doubt about it.
You definitely dress like one.
Born in '73. Wow. All right, co-host. Like, get on. Whose idea was this crap anyway?
Yeah, definitely yours.
Nicely done. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'm not of it. And my point is, we were crashed on. Like, my experience of myself and my own generation from, you know, the boomers and the other, you know, traditionalists, I guess. Yeah. That's who's before the boomers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it made us feel horrible about ourselves as a cohort.
Yeah.
So you know, Gen Xers are running the show now, and we were all told, oh my God, we're going to get this, the world's going to be run by these kids, you know, listen to Kiss and Megadeth and all that, you know. And so, yeah, I'm Rebel is what came to mind. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Because the impact and the slam that you get from that is huge as a cohort.
Right. And then like your generation also gets associated with things like the AIDS epidemic and things like that. I mean, I guess this generation will be the coronavirus pandemic, you know, but maybe they'll be coronials.
Right.
As the generation, there might be the coronials. Who
I
knows?
do think we need to get the cooler names and letters. I mean, we had the coolest letter, and then you just had to follow the rest of the letters.
Like X, Y, Z. I've heard that alpha is next.
Oh God!
Like that we're starting over with alpha. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So really, kind of how this comes to a head for me is that Kelly Services, which is a pretty big leader in career services and placement services for people who are like underemployed and things like this, they did a lot of market research, and they looked at the workforce in general. And the truth is that 74% of hiring professionals are saying this is the biggest multi-generational kind of shaping of our workforce right now that we have experienced. Like they are shaping their recruitment around 4 different generations.
Interesting. And Say more. I'm curious what you mean about shaping. And,
Yeah. So,
yeah.
right, I was going to get into that. So
Okay.
basically, if you're a hiring professional right now, you have to know how to recruit people that are boomers who may be approaching the retirement age, Gen Xers who are also approaching like the latter years of their working years, looking and focusing on being a lifer, career oriented person.
Oh my God.
You have to look at millennials who
Yeah.
have resumes that look like they've been hopping around and job shopping forever, as like if that was their job. And then you have Gen Zers who are so tech savvy that they want the delivery of the services and interview and the remote working and all of that stuff. So recruitment
Interesting. Yeah.
has been really difficult in a lot of ways because you're transcending 4 different generations to fill spots at a company.
Yeah, we were taught by our parents. You know, my dad worked in an aluminum producing factory for years and years and years, same place. And now, you know, in my mastermind group, we talk about business, and it's totally changed to where it's desirable to have that job jumping kind of resume. Like,
Yeah.
I've actually tried to teach my kid a little bit, like, have some consistency at your job. And that might be going against what people are needing to do, which is really is crazy to me.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to get into as we continue this discussion too, is that, you know, is there more than one way to kind of look at this? You know, just because somebody is job hopping, does that mean they don't have a lot of commitment or loyalty to an employer, or is that looking out for themselves and protecting their own value and
Being
their own mental
progressive.
health and being progressive in that venture?
Yeah.
And so I think that's where we want to go with this discussion. And right now, what we're seeing in the workforce, but also in the communities that we live in, is that we're having this new wave of Gen Zers that are coming into the workforce. And then we also have about 20% of the boomer population that would be ready for retirement still working and still having to remain employed because of, you know, different financial disasters and crises that have happened. And some of them have, you know, had a couple of different relationships and have children that are a little bit younger and they're still going to college. So,
Yeah.
you know,
There is a spread. Yeah.
yeah, there is a spread. And I think that things that kind of align there, and what I want to look at it even from kind of a ecological or sociological perspective and your clinical lens, is how this presents itself too, like in our communities, in our leisure activities, in our churches, in the way that we work together, live together, play together in this human experience. Because, you know, there's a lot of gentrification that have happened in developments. There's a lot, like you ride down the road to where I live, and there's 55 and older communities, these beautiful communities, but you don't live there unless you're 55 or older.
Now, you know what's interesting that just popped in my mind, and so I want to put it out there. We have a lot of international downloads.
Yeah.
We're kind of probably speaking about it from an American perspective, but I wonder how universal that is, because I was thinking of actually like China. You know, we literally have downloads from China, which I think is really pretty cool. And, you know, they have I would bet they have a very different kind of. It's just interesting, right? How does the WHO, the World Health Organization, make distinctions for worldwide? Because different countries have such different experiences.
Yeah, to point this out, I think this is more Americanized. I don't
Yeah.
think that this is applicable to all cultures or countries across the world.
Like half of our downloads just turned to show off.
Yeah, sorry about that. But I think it is interesting to think through, because if you think in various cultures, you have one or more parents that live in the home of one person of the family, whether it's the male side or the female side or whoever side, they live back with their son or daughter.
Yeah.
And that's a cultural thing. And so I think that is transcendental of the generational gaps that we see too. So I think culturally there would be a big impact on what that looks like, because they wouldn't have divided communities. Sometimes it's just a pure space issue. There's not spaces where we're dividing out populations of people and only this generation kind of lives together or congregates together, because that's not even an option, or that's not even developed. So I think there's a lot of ways to look at it. I also think that religious implications can play into that. I think there's a lot of things or factors that kind of influence that. But for today's show, sorry, our international friends, we are looking at kind of the Americanized version of this.
Gotcha.
And kind of the cross sections there. So what do you think are some of the issues of multi-generational communities and things like that? What do you think are some of the issues that they face?
Like multi-generational communities. Can you say a little more about
so like communities where boomers, Gen Xers, millennials,
all live
like we're
together?
all living around the same types of people and stuff like that?
Confusion and misunderstanding from I don't know what word would really characterize this, but what first comes to my mind is not having a good perception of the other cohorts.
Yeah.
Right? Shame-based feelings, I was saying that before. I mean, I really believe the older generations just chronically crap on the smaller, younger generations, the newer ones. I feel like there's also different applications to where parenting kind of comes into play. And you mentioned the workplace for sure, but it's just, to me, it all centers around not having the same experience of the world. Although, I really want to highlight, because I oftentimes very much think about this when I'm dealing with cohorts in this topic with generations and such. I kind of feel like the human emotional experience, right?
Yeah.
I say this. I say this at the beginning of every show, almost. Well, every show. I don't think that's changed. I don't think the human emotional experience is really different from one generation to the other. Can I make that bold statement?
Yeah, I love that. Say it again for the people in the back.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Because shame is shame, hurt is hurt, fear is fear, anxiety is anxiety. And I think that was in the Middle Ages just as much as, I'm watching a Turn right now. It's a show on Netflix.
Yeah.
And they're really portraying
about colonial armies and people
Absolutely.
that turn coats, things like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's fantastically cool show. But I'm actually looking at the cultural aspects there and how George Washington struggled. He was portrayed in the show with depression.
Mm-hmm.
And the impressive, just all that he had on his shoulders. I said impressive. I also mean oppressive pressure that he had to deal with. Well, I don't care what generation you are. Those types of experiences, I do think, transcend the generations. And if we can switch our shamers off and turn our perceptions into understanding you're young, but you still experience love when you're dating, right? And feelings are feelings. And how can we help experienced generations really get with the younger generations? Listen, my grandma was great, and she helped me learn a couple things. I remember talking to her about loving people, and she talked to me. It was very nice. I don't know. I'll get off the soapbox.
Yeah, no, I love that. But I was, my wheels were turning as you were talking, because I'm thinking about, even in our therapy offices, how many people across multiple generations potentially stayed in even unhealthy relationships because of the times, the culture, how things were expressed and how things were suppressed, that even if a relationship was extremely toxic and unhealthy, you stayed married. Like, that was a thing. And so I'm not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent, but what I am saying is that I do believe that we've learned and evolved some of that emotional experience, that while it's still transcending, we've gotten potentially a little healthier at dealing with some of the things that were kind of in older generations not dealt with as much.
Not to mention, we live longer.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And, I'm not going to talk about what topic, because I think it'll take us down a different bunny trail. But for this reason, I was doing this in session today. It was a fascinating reality. Think about this in the intergenerational realities here. It is much more potent you're posing and talking about today, because we have essentially like doubled our lifespan in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
So there are many more generations at the same time. Otherwise, there were like two parents and kids. That was, because we died when we were about 45 years old.
Yeah.
So now it's not. You got like four, like you just said. They're looking at that for work. This is a huge whole new human experience.
Right.
You ever think of that?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely have thought of that, but I think that those implications change the dynamic of everything. We start to see, whole family events happening around us that include 4 generations of people, if not more. I have 5 generations still alive and kicking in my
that's
family.
interesting. I guess I
Shout
got
out
3.
nanny. But
Do what?
I said shout out to my nanny.
Oh, that's awesome. How old is she?
She's 83.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, love that lady. She is spry. Anyway, that's a whole other show. But I think that what I kind of want to transition into now is talking about these kind of 3 main categories of issues that I feel like have come up for this multi-generational kind of dynamic. That if we are not careful, if we do not shift
you just
and
did a transition. That's awesome. I don't have to worry about transitions. It's a different experience, y'all.
Yeah, but if we are not careful, and if we're not, I'm just going to say kind.
Yeah.
We can really cause some deeper rooted emotional damage to people that we love and respect by kind of harboring on these kinds of thoughts and feelings we have surrounding generations.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting point, Kasie, because when you're bringing this little segment into focus for us, it actually just reversed what I was saying before, in that, interestingly enough, we crash on old people too, don't we?
We do.
What
I
is
do
it?
that a lot
Quote,
to you every day.
Quote unquote. Okay, boomer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Or you definitely are dressing like a Gen Xer.
I know you now. You said I know, right? Like, what does that even mean? But there's class warfare almost with this in the disrespect that we have. I mean, my father-in-law, stepdad, mother, father, these people are amazing people, and not to forget my mother-in-law, right?
Yeah.
And they all, like, boy, I could look at them so badly, and I wonder how many people do when they think of the frustrations of that generation. The boomers spent so much money in our government, and now we have so much debt, right? You ever hear that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man,
They
just
never planned for retirement.
freaking battle lines, right? Yeah, I've heard that, right? This is battle lines.
Yeah, they're just dependent on Social Security. They never plan for retirement. They're, X, Y, and Z. So I kind of did
you do that on purpose? X,
Y, and
Y?
Z. Yeah,
Okay.
and Z. So I kind of did some like non-formal research, right? Like I asked some family, some friends, a couple of people I see in my office actually, just to real brief before we started the session. I was like, answer a question for me, okay? And I had them kind of do and perform the word association test, okay? And I just asked them. And so then I kind of collectively gathered rudimentary data and then categorized their responses as to what are kind of the typical stereotypes associated with the generations. And so the first segment is really about this negative stereotyping,
right,
because I think that is something that's very prominent. And so boomers, collectively across the board, what people said that I surveyed, which was probably like, honestly speaking, maybe 20 people. So it's not,
well, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
A lot of these studies that you have around the world nowadays, it involves like 20 people.
Right, for sure. But
Sorry for
really
that,
like
Pop.
afraid of using technology and things are always broken. That was the stereotype I got overwhelmingly the most. In fact, I get called all the time to fix my mom's printer was one of the responses.
Things are always broken.
Yeah. The negative stereotypes that I gathered about Gen X.
Oh, God.
Just looking to get ahead, focused on self-promotion.
Wow.
What are your thoughts there, Gen Xer?
Egocentric, and I'm still struck that I'm like in your parents' cohort. That's just really, 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 really jacked up.
Honestly, only one of my parent is a Gen Xer.
Yeah.
The other one's a boomer.
Okay. Oh, see. Oh, dear God. No,
She married up.
hit me again with that, because I want to, think about
Just looking to get ahead / self-promoting.
it. Yeah.
Selling yourself.
As a Gen Xer, okay, I really experienced a lot of crashing, like I said before. You guys are screw ups. You're watching the boob tube. You're going to be, stupid because you're not studying and thinking. You're watching too much TV, and oh God, what's going to happen when you guys are in charge? And now, okay, well, we pretty much are in charge. I mean, we're running the show in a lot of regards. Boomers are moving out, and we're in these big positions. And now we're selfish, and now we're too driven and too progressive of our own agenda. I mean, it's striking for you to hear you say that, and then feel the way I felt when I was a teenager, and feel the way I feel now when I'm pushing 50. I haven't hit 50 yet, by the way. I have not, but that's okay.
It's going to be a glorious 2 years, Chris.
Year and a half.
Also, I think that struck a little chord there, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
offensive, right? It's
Absolutely.
kind of offensive. Millennials, entitled.
Of course. Trophy
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah. And that's pretty offensive to me.
Absolutely.
Because I feel like I've worked for literally everything I have. So, and then Gen Z, and I told you this one, and I think that you had some comments about this one in reference to your own children. Lack of interpersonal skills, like the texting generation, unable to talk to people, unable to relate because they're so in on their technology devices.
We're going to talk about communication a little bit, right?
Yeah, we are.
I'll hold it till there.
Okay, yeah. So perhaps some of this sounds a little bit familiar. Perhaps it struck a chord with you as you're listening at home, and perhaps you're able to kind of think through like what your friends and colleagues are like. But the truth is that no one is judgment free. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And by the
go ahead.
way, we need judgments. From a clinical perspective in my therapy brain, you have got to be able to judge the situation, judge the employee, judge the candidate, judge your friends. We make assessments. We want to have good judgment. We want to steer away from bad judgment. We definitely want to avoid like judgmentalness. Right?
Oh,
How's that for a
that's
set of series?
that's a takeaway. Yeah, we need judgment to help us make sound, discerned decisions in our
Good judgment.
life. We need good judgment. We need to steer away from judgmentalness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to mention bad judgment, because when
Yeah.
you're trying to figure something out and do something and you're making poor choices, people can execute bad judgment.
Yeah. And so definitely we all have automatic thoughts. Like that's just a known fact. Like as soon as I walked in today and had these beautiful plaid, autonomous looking pants on, you guys had automatic thoughts, right? It might have been good thoughts, bad thoughts, indifferent thoughts. There were some thoughts, right? Like that's what I tell everybody. We had automatic thoughts. The truth is that our brain kind of helps us hold on to or process through what is important and what isn't important, right? And then we kind of react to what we find to be important about what's going on. If there was a rattlesnake in the room, hopefully we'd have enough judgment to get out of the room, right? And that's our survival base. But what happens sometimes with this generational stuff is I think we have one experience or two experiences with someone from a given generation, and it starts to perpetuate these automatic thoughts, and we kind of start applying that, which is the quintessential definition of stereotypes. Would you agree?
And confirmational bias.
And confirmational bias. Speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, well, yeah, because we begin to develop a view, an assessment, maybe even a judgment on what I need to do with this particular employee or candidate, and then I build layer after layer after layer that confirms, no matter how many people I talk to that are very different than that one employee, the exact same thing. So it gets replicated. It's like a nasty germ that get replicated over and over and over again. Fair?
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And so what that stereotyping does is it creates a culture of kind of disrespect, you know? And the same things that I feel like people get angry about across generations are actually some of the same strengths of that generation. Exactly what you talked about when we talked about Gen Xers, you know? It's kind of a Phoenix situation, you know? The generation before you burnt you down.
They did.
And you guys rose from the ashes, and most of you are the leaders of organizations and companies.
Doing pretty good.
This company is one of them, right?
Yeah,
like
it
the company
actually
that
is.
you run right now.
You're
You are an author. You have so many qualities about you that are not just sex, drugs, and rock and roll, unfortunately, right?
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point.
Yeah, and so I think that is part of this. And so people see like millennials as entitled, so on and so forth. But the truth is I believe our generation is really in touch with their mental health. I think that they are very protective over their time. They think through a work-life balance a lot of the time. And some people in this generation are blissfully happy people, even if they're not achieving at the level their parents before them feel like that they should achieve.
Craig, our beloved Craig,
Yeah.
many months ago, absolutely, and it was funny the way that he presented the article that he saw or the facts that he saw. He totally gave a millennial compliment. It was weird, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, they're not bad. Look, this is what they did. You know, they have decreased the divorce rate for the first time
Yeah.
in like eons. It's been 50, 55%. I quote him many times over. And he highlighted that they brought it down to about 45 to 50%, 45% now.
Yeah.
Get divorced as opposed to forever. It's been 55, 50, 60%. Neil, do you have a thought? He's got the mic. That's a cue.
Go ahead, Neil.
Well, one, going to the divorce, I think part of it is I feel like a lot of millennials aren't getting married as quick. They're finding what they really want, and so
waiting longer to have
waiting.
kids, establish their life, and then they're going to therapy early when they get sideways.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what he talked about.
But the one thing that stood out when you guys talk about these generations upon the next generation, like the irony that it's the older generations that kind of create the next generation, but yet they have such a negative ideology of what they're like. That just seems kind of like, I'm thinking like, if you don't like what you did, you kind of created that generation.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the thing that's kind of funny about it is they really they need to take ownership on what the next generation's like. But I think the hardest part is the difference. You talk about it, the boomer generation is put your nose to the grindstone, just do it no matter what. The next generation kind of has the hippies kind of coming out. You start getting close to that peace, love, and happiness. What do I want? And then your generation came out, Chris, with I'm going to do it my way. I'm not going to listen to you, that rebel.
I'm going to do it my...
Frank Sinatra,
different generation?
not a Gen Xer. Yeah.
No.
Thanks to that traditionalist for that song. Yeah.
So this is going to be a special episode because I just moved the camera. We got camera on Neil on camera, right? I thought that was cool. So if I messed up your vision now, you have to fix it again.
Sorry. But I think that kind of segues perfectly into kind of the next topic, especially what you were saying, is that kind of the next kind of stereotype or kind of field that we look at is this concept of differences in approach to work and life. And I think that is something that can drive someone crazy, but also drive them to do more in their life. And so what were you going to think? What came up for you?
just being genuine. Oh gosh, have the new generations created the progressive movements that we see in politics?
Oh yeah, I mean
Ooh.
that's part of it, right?
Goodness.
Is how that works, and if they
It'd be alarming.
Sometimes we think like if they put half the energy into working that they did in their political affiliation, then maybe we wouldn't have shortages of staffing places. But that
Not a
again
slam
is
there.
Right. But I mean, but that's where we go in our brain because we think about those things.
It is.
And it does spill over into a very divisive and bipartisan concept sometimes, and it goes way beyond the show, of course, to be able to discuss those aspects. But typically speaking, boomers and Gen Xers, they're kind of lifers, right? Like they get into organizations, they get into a career choice, and they really feel strongly
My
about
wife's been in the same job
loyal.
for pushing 25, now 30 years is the goal.
Yeah, my mom's a retired teacher. My dad has been in Brick Mason since he was 19. So, like, they're lifers, and they're very loyal to people. They're very loyal to employers. They're very loyal to each other. And
just another thing that pops in my head.
Yeah, what?
Ethics, right? In the counseling field, social work, licensed therapists and all that, we have ethics. And actually, an ethical requirement to be a social worker is to... You read it. You ever read this? You know where I'm going? To have you're counseling. I wonder if you have the same thing. We have an ethical consideration to be loyal to your organization. It's a part of our code of ethics that we are subscribed to follow.
Yeah.
Is that going away? Because now, you job bump around.
Yeah, but I also think with the creation of like new advances in technology and things like that, I don't know if it's necessarily the loyalty component versus the ethical component. I think the ethics remain, but the loyalty part is sometimes questionable on both sides of that fence. Is the agency being loyal to the employee?
Right. Yeah.
If it's forcing the issue of overwork, underpaid, things like that. And I think that millennials have really put that as the issue at the forefront.
You know what's just interesting? If I catch myself in a little moment of, I'm going to say a word, Neil, you can rate this R if you want. I'm going to catch myself in a moment of bullshit, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Check this out. I think I just did it in the sense that, I made the comment, is ethics going to have to change because of the commitment to staying in an agency and being loyal for a long time. But wait a minute. I said earlier that emotions don't really change. Right. The human experiences don't really change. And so, you can be in a job for a year or 3 years or 30 years, and you can still have an ethical consideration to be accountable and responsible and responsive to that agency, right?
Absolutely.
So why am I saying what I just said 2 minutes ago?
Right.
Yeah.
Gen X, the generation of contradictions.
Oh my God. Really? You do that?
But I think too that millennials and Gen Y groups and Gen Zs, they typically enjoy like a more flexible schedule. Our kids' schedules kind of dictate our lives. Like we typically enjoy working remotely sometimes, if that's a possibility, having the flexibility, thinking that if we've put in our 8 hours, if we put in the work and got the job done, do we really have to live and die by the 8-hour rule? Like, do we stay at a job until 5, literally doing nothing for the last hour if our job was done at 4?
God, the millennials, they're not hard workers. They want to go home. They actually don't care about getting the job done. They're just...
Right. So it's quantity versus quality.
I'm joking.
No, I understand that. But like in a productivity-driven society that's led by a lot of people who are from Gen X, it can become a very big functional problem. I have a really cool story real quick to kind of tie into this. My husband has worked from home for the last 9 years. Okay. So the pandemic had nothing to do with him working from home. However, when we lived in Raleigh, like he had moved home base from where he was in Research Triangle because honestly, the traffic was so bad. He was spending 2 hours in the car to go 10 miles.
It's terrible.
So he was like, absolutely not. His employer was like, just stay home and work remotely. So he's working from home. Well, that was an abrupt change. Our neighbors, I love them. They were so kind. But our neighbors kept bringing us casseroles. And we were like, what's going on? They just keep bringing us these casseroles. And so finally I saw the woman that lived next door to me and I was like, hey, I really appreciate all the dinners. They're like, has your husband been able to find a new job? And I was like, I'm sorry.
That's funny.
Do you know something I don't? Because as far as I know, he's fully employed. Like I'm thinking I've been like punked and here's my husband's been unemployed this whole time. No, she thought he was unemployed because his car had not left the driveway.
Wow. Right.
For a period of time.
That's so
So
funny.
she kept bringing us dinner thinking that we probably needed some food. We had a new baby. Like I could see how the wheels spun. And so that just really presented to me kind of this stereotypical, like you don't leave to go to work your 8 to 5 anymore. Ergo, you've probably lost your job or you're not working very hard.
I think we really have to be careful about the assumptions that we make about groups of people.
Yeah, for
Listen,
sure.
I'm looking at the camera. Y'all met my son. Very proud of my 19-year-old son. Gen Zers or whatever don't want to work, want to have everything handed to them. The trophy generation, even more so than millennials. That dude works hard. He is a hard charger, wants to work constantly, doesn't want to stop. He's ticked off that he can't go to work on Saturday or Sundays 7 days a week because they've changed some of the policies with the new generational factors. And so, man, I mean, be careful about the assumptions we make.
Right, yeah, because it radiates into communities as well when we see this play out, right? That, we're going to make all of our church services geared towards like 30-somethings and their kids to invite more people in. Well, boomers and Gen Xers still go to church, like we need to introduce multi-generational elements. And
all the music.
Yeah. And
Turn it down.
But this is how I know that I'm kind of a cusper, right? Like on the Gen X and the millennial side
Right.
is because I'm like, are they playing the electric guitar during the Lord's Prayer? Like this is distracting, this is too much.
That's funny.
But that kind of leads us to our last point kind of in this part of the segment, which is the communication differences. You expressed it earlier on and I'm too, and talking about how Gen Zers get the worst rap for interpersonal communication problems, not being able to effectively communicate, not being able to kind of face people, talk to adults, talk to employers, things like that.
Yeah, I'll be brief because we want to get to the solutions.
Yeah.
Of things, but that is what we were talking about during lunch the other day, and I think that's part of the assumptions that people make. I was told as a Gen Xer that I'm watching too much TV and not going to be able to run the world, and the world's going to fall apart, and just all of that stuff, and we're not out playing and doing things. I mean, we had a fort, we had basketball, we did have more face-to-face time playing and doing things as opposed to video time. I feel like this is a fear of technology. Mm-hmm. When radio came out, the same fears were there. I've read about that and seen that. When TV came out, the same fears were there. And now the computers are out and we're video conferencing and all this kind of stuff. The same fears of not knowing how to date, talk, communicate are there. And these kids, they'll be able to talk. There's teenagers right now. What teenager talks, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was what we were talking about at lunch. Does that make sense when it comes to communication?
It does. Yeah, and just thinking about how even your son has transcended that in his career right now, being able to talk and interface with people and in the car industry and things like that.
And he showed it on the mics on the show a couple weeks ago. It was really, really cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so, but what you say is very true. The same thing was true back when you're a teenager. You just shut your door and turned on your stereo, and
walkie-talkie or walkie. Oh gosh,
8-track.
It was not an 8-track.
Walkman.
What was it called? Walkman. Thank you.
Yeah, you had a Walkman, and then Neil and I had a Discman. With the anti-skip feature in the car. Oh my gosh,
Walkman
that
were
thing
cool.
was amazing. Yeah. So, but that's what we would do, and now kids just put in AirPods and text message instead of writing notes and trading them at lockers at school. So the same things have been present.
Same human emotional experience, right?
Yeah, because it's about connection.
Right.
And that's really what this is. And if you want to connect with your kids right now, you better learn how to text.
That's right.
You better learn the lingo. You better learn what social media apps they're on because it is a world in and of itself.
My friends have started to get on Snapchat, talk to their friends, and I am so resistant. I feel convicted right now.
Yeah, don't do it.
Don't do it?
Don't do it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah. I definitely don't have Snapchat. But anyway, so let's jump into some solutions for this. And I think that you'll kind of like this segment as well. But so how do we kind of effectively remedy some of these gaps in stereotypes? I think number one, as Chris likes to say, is check yourself. I think that's always an important step. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. If you know, which we all do, we've already discussed this, that you have biases towards certain generations, kind of rethink what's going on within.
Let's park out here for a minute.
Yeah, please do.
Right?
Yep.
Because this is an important need to understand component. I think it's a big deal. And why I say that is because we go around in a psychological way not really being aware of what we're operational on. All right? You know this from your therapy offices, Kasie. I don't think people think about it in their relationships. But when you're not even becoming aware of the biases that you have, then you're operational completely in the blind. Mm-hmm. It's like you've been depressed all your life, ho-hum, in a miserable state with no energy, no motivation, tearful, not knowing why, appetite going down, in a brain fog. These things are real, and you never even knew you had depression. How many times have you diagnosed somebody that's 40, 50 years old, and it's for the first time that they've gotten that insight?
Oh, right.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a rough way to operate when you have biases against a generation of people, and it's not accurate, and it changes your behavior. So you've got to become aware, at least, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think self-awareness is the biggest tool there, especially when we've kind of talked about this throughout the whole show tonight, that basically, I mean, you're talking about everywhere you turn, it's going to be multi-generational. Like, we're
living longer,
immune from other generations. You're going to have to deal with it, as they say.
Another application of this. I know we need to wrap up, but it's a fun topic, Kasie.
I love it.
I mean, I have somebody that's retiring right now in my therapy practice, and the challenge that she has had finishing up her career with all the younger people.
Yeah.
I mean, she's older. She worked a long time. And it just applies. Be careful about the biases that you have and not even know that you have them.
So I think one of my favorite takeaways is something that I learned when I was working at children residential care. And that is the difference between the golden rule and the platinum rule. So we all know kind of like the quips of the golden rule, right? Like, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Glad you didn't test me.
Yeah, sorry.
I know that one, but I don't know the platinum rule.
Right. So the platinum rule, and what I challenged myself with, and I would challenge everyone today, is that treat others the way that they want to be treated. And so
Okay.
I think the context of that rule is this. If a person has aspects of their personality that you don't understand, that you don't vibe with because they are in a different generation or they are someone of a different culture, whatever the case may be, whether it's multi-generational, multicultural, or both, which can happen a lot in our neighborhoods and stuff too, try to educate yourself. Try to understand where they come from. Try to get how they communicate. Not necessarily texting them, but understanding that they may not be face-to-face communicationers. Maybe you leave a note in their box. Maybe you leave something for them on their doorstep. Like, do something that may feel like it's inclusive to them by stepping outside of your comfort zone to try to
I like
treat them the
everything
way
you're
they
saying,
want
but
to
I
be.
almost want a qualifier.
Okay.
Almost like an addition to the statement.
Okay.
And I'm not sure how to work about it, so work on it and think about it. And I think I will, because I think this is big. Say your front line again.
Treat others the way that they want to be treated.
Within reason and as long as it's not self-destructive.
Well, yeah.
I know that might be
that's
assumed.
That's
Yeah.
a good clinical qualifier. Thank you for bringing that to our attention because I think that is important. So as long as it's not self-destructive, what I simply mean by that is that if I treat everyone the way I want to be treated, then I'm making that interaction about myself.
Right. Okay.
I think that's where I'm going with that.
That's the spirit of
But
it.
if I treat others the way they want to be treated, then I'm making that interaction an authentic interaction based on what the other person's needs are.
Boy, that would help out a marriage too, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it definitely would. Yeah, it definitely would.
Plug.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And then just kind of understanding that we can experience this human collective experience together by coming up with just common decency when it comes to our expectations for one another.
The human emotional experience. Let's figure this out together. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what a brilliant gift it is that we can live longer and learn from each other with a very different perspective. You know what happens when you have a problem-solving process?
What's
and
that?
you've got people from having completely different perspectives? Like, wow, man, you're going to come up with so many more solutions.
Yeah. And so I think to kind of wrap this up, and then we can get your final thoughts, as you always say, tell to me too, is that something that transcends all generations, be kind.
Yeah.
Be kind. What others may view as being entitled is actually a whole generation of enlightened people who have experienced life and have done literally the best that they can with what they've been given. And those individuals enjoy a shared ethic, they enjoy shared values, and that is the essential definition of culture and community. So be kind.
That's absolutely very cool. I appreciate that, Kasie. I appreciate you doing the show prep and kind of guiding us and all. And I think, I would talk to you in the cameras really out there if you hear my voice in summarizing. Like, this is an important topic. This is something that we need to pay attention to and that has gross misunderstandings. I might make that bold statement. So when you got younger people that you're dealing with, I love the platinum rule, giving the qualifiers to treat people the way they want to be treated. Young people, when you're looking at old people, like, stop saying, oh, okay, boomer, and discrediting people that have lived on this earth for 60, 70, 80 years. They've learned a lot. You're learning, and they're learning from you. Like, we're all learning together in generations. And so I think that's something that we need to kind of begin to understand more and more of. So we are going to talk about 12 steps next week. That's going to be a really pretty cool show. I think we're going to take a week off, Kasie, because we have a really cool guest that is live and in the person. I'm pretty excited about that. Meantime, it's becoming a little less humid in the country, at least in our neck of the woods. I hope you're enjoying the wrapping up of the summer as we move into the fall months. Around the world, coronavirus, Delta's caught up with us in the States. We're all still working through this. So stay tuned, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you, everyone.